Today is day 17 of this Hunker Down 2020 adventure that we're on. I'd be less than honest if I were to try to say that I'm not being affected by it. I definitely am. We all are. And one of the things that I'm noticing as we get into this journey that COVID-19 has launched us all on is it doesn't get any easier. We exercise coping mechanisms in order to get through it. And I thank God that we've developed some pretty good coping mechanisms to do that. And it's really inconvenient what we're having to go through. But maybe in God's plan, not that God sent this upon us, but I think about Romans 8:28 many times, how even in the bad stuff, God is working together for good for those who love Him, and even for those that don't love God yet. And maybe in a bigger scheme of things, a lot of good is going to come out of COVID-19, especially where the church is concerned, especially where Christians are concerned. We're in the season of Lent, and this is unlike any Lent that I have ever experienced. And as an oblate, familiar with the Rule of Saint Benedict, a great little way of life. We all need a way of life. Yes, indeed, we need the scriptures. One of the things that monastic spirituality does, it gives us a way of life that's built on the scriptures. And that's what Saint Benedict is doing in the Rule of Saint Benedict. He's presenting a way of life that interprets the gospel, that interprets the scriptures in a way that allows us to apply them to our lives in a very, very meaningful, fruitful way. And he writes about the observance of Lent for his monks in the monasteries. And not only for monks in the monasteries, but a lot of people have discovered the Rule of Saint Benedict and have tapped into it and have begun to mine the wealth that's in the rule. And in chapter 49, Saint Benedict talks about the observance of Lent. He writes and tells us that the life of a monk ought to be a continuous Lent. Since few, however, have the strength for this, we urge the entire community during these days of Lent to keep its manner of life most pure, and to wash away in this holy season the negligences of other times. This we can do in a fitting manner by refusing to indulge evil habits and by devoting ourselves to prayer with tears, to reading, to compunction of heart, and self-denial. During these days, therefore, we will add to the usual measure of our service something by way of private prayer and abstinence from food or drink, so that each of us will have something above the assigned measure to offer God of His own will with the joy of the Holy Spirit. In other words, let each one deny himself some food, drink, sleep, needless talking and idle jesting, and look forward to Holy Easter with joy and spiritual longing. It's rather interesting that here we are in the season of Lent, approaching the latter end of Lent, looking forward, if you will, in a sad way, to Holy Week. Not only sad because we realize that Holy Week is about the culmination of the life of Jesus on earth and his suffering, his crucifixion, and his resurrection, the joys of the resurrection that followed. But we're sad as well because we're not able to celebrate that in churches as we are accustomed to. This is the first time in my life that churches have ever been closed. And you know, don't get up in arms about what's going on, thinking that we're having our rights and privileges taken away from us. This is a health crisis, and we need to realize that it's a health crisis and focus on that and be mindful that we are our brother's keeper. We are our brother's keeper. And in order to keep our brothers safe in the times that we're living in order to keep our brothers and sisters safe in the time that we're living in, right now for the duration of this crisis, we have to exercise some reasonable common sense. And the tragedy is that most people in this world today are rather short on common sense. Excuse me for being so blunt, but that's the truth of the matter. Still piling up shoulder to shoulder, knowing that this virus is around. So, in a strange roundabout way, COVID-19 has imposed upon us something of what Saint Benedict is talking about here in chapter 40 of chapter 49 of the Rule of Saint Benedict in regard to the observance of Lent. We can't go to the store and get all the foods that we normally like to go get. They're not there on the shelf. We're having to deny ourselves some food, some drink, some socializing, things that are recommended in the rule. Recommended in the rule and imposed upon us by COVID-19. The life of a monk ought to be a continuous Lent. We should constantly be observing some type of discipline in our lives, some type of spiritual discipline. And we all falter, we all fail, we all get lazy, we all grow weak. And yet we find ourselves in times like this when there's so much tragedy around. You turn on the news and you hear of more that have died. You turn on the news, you see how this thing has multiplied itself time and time and time again. Exponentially, I think, is the word that people are using in regard to the way it multiplies itself. It's very contagious. And in times like these, we need to think about the things that are most important. We need to focus on the things that are most important. Love of family, love of friends, love of God, love for the church, love for worship. The very things that reveal the fulfillment of those two commandments that Jesus left behind. Not that Jesus canceled out the 10. They're just as valid today as they were when God wrote them on stone for Moses to give to the people. But to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, to love our neighbor as ourselves, those are pretty big things. And maybe in this crisis, God will turn our hearts to the things that we really need to be entertaining in our hearts. In Psalm 9, verse 1 says, I will give thanks unto thee, O Lord, with my whole heart. I will speak of all thy wondrous works. I will be glad and rejoice in thee. Yea, my songs will I make of thy name, O Most High. Seek God in these days that we're living in. Make these days that we're living in, make these COVID-19 days that we're living in a spiritual journey. A journey to grow closer to God, a journey to grow closer to your loved ones, a journey to rediscover the most important things in life, and to turn loose, let go of a lot of the superfluous things that are just amusements that have no eternal value.